нужно понимать, что американцы сейчас выходят на совершенно новый технологический уровень.
The F-22 Raptor is the most advanced of its breed.
The Russian Federation focused on replacing its Soviet aircraft with new, more powerful examples.
The world lives under the mercy of a huge umbrella of jet fighters. We're talking about a massive market where trillions of dollars have been and continue to be spent. This market, which you may not be fully aware of, is currently undergoing tremendous and astonishing economic developments from Washington through Ankara, Riyadh, Paris, New Delhi, reaching Moscow, Beijing, Jakarta, and Taipei. But first, let me tell you a very important story. We'll quickly go back to the late 1950s, when the Soviet Union had a huge problem with the American Air Force, specifically with supersonic reconnaissance aircraft and new American bombers.
Which were at that time considered long range, they secured extremely valuable information by bringing back reports and photographs.
The existence of these aircraft was very troubling for the Soviets, who did not know how they would protect their vast borders as they were the largest country in the world in terms of area, and at that time, the world was just getting to know air defense systems. A few years later, specifically in late 1963, American spy satellites took some photos that caused terror in America and Europe. These were photos of a new Soviet fighter. Its engine nozzles were the size of a small car, and its wings were very long. It was longer and wider than any American or Western fighter aircraft. The MiG-25 at that time made the Americans scramble because they did not know its real capabilities, which were actually much less than they had assumed. This terror made the Americans want an interceptor aircraft that could do almost everything: maneuver and engage at close ranges in dogfights, carry precise missiles capable of hitting targets at these distances and at low altitudes, and able to target enemy objectives from long distances with sensitive radars and guided missiles. The result was the development and manufacture of the F-15 Eagle, the most successful combat aircraft in the history of the United States to this date. It's the only aircraft that has not been shot down to this day over the 51 years since its first flight in 1972. The United States produced more than 1,600 units of this aircraft in various models, and American private companies have made tens of billions of dollars over these 51 years and still make tremendous profits from it to this day. For example, Boeing, the manufacturer of all models of the F-15, is now producing the latest model, the F-15EX Eagle II. Can you guess how much one aircraft costs? Over $115 million per aircraft. And there are many orders for this aircraft, such as the US Navy requesting more than 100 aircraft. The occupying entity preliminarily requested 25 aircraft for its Air Force, and Indonesia received approval from the American Congress to supply 36 aircraft along with other equipment in a deal worth $14 billion. However, America is not the only country that produces fighter jets. There are, of course, Russia, China, France, Sweden, Britain, South Korea, and recently Turkey has joined the list unexpectedly and unprecedentedly for most people with its TF-X fighter. Collectively, we find Europe has two major future projects for the production of sixth-generation fighters between 2030 and 2040. One of which is a significant and dangerous project that Saudi Arabia is trying to join as a partner for months, along with a third joint project for the production of an Asian fighter between South Korea and Indonesia. This is besides the ongoing American Joint Strike Fighter program, the most expensive armament program in history, costing over $1.5 trillion, which has already produced the F-35 in all its models. So, we need to understand exactly what's happening. What's the story with fighter jets? Why are countries racing to produce them and spending tens of billions of dollars on them? What's the significance of fighter jets for the economies of countries, and why are Turkey and others manufacturing their own jets? Why does Saudi Arabia want to join the giant European project to produce a sixth-generation aircraft? And will America actually lose its dominance over the most important weapon market in the world? Let's discuss and help you understand what's happening. It's very important for you all to understand that when a country sells a fighter jet, it's not just selling a military aircraft, but is selling complete relations with a buyer. Political, economic, military, and security relations on all levels you can imagine. That's why there was a time when all major and medium-sized countries wanted to build their own fighter jets. For example, in the 80s, South Africa, Taiwan, Yugoslavia, Brazil, Romania, the occupying entity, Japan, India, and others had actual engineering plans for domestic fighter jets. A few of these aircraft were actually manufactured, but in small numbers. Most disappeared during the 90s. There were many reasons for the collapse of national programs, as Richard Abulafia, the executive director of the American consultancy firm Aerodynamics, says, one of the most important being the reduction of defense budgets in most countries after the Cold War ended. Thus, the market for jet fighters itself also began to shrink. So, if you're a country other than America and Russia and insisted on making your jet fighter, what would you do, and would you succeed? Let's take a look at two important models, Japan and France. Looking at Japan, we find a good example of the failure of a national program to manufacture fighter jets. In the 90s, Japan spent billions of dollars on developing the Mitsubishi F2. This aircraft was a joint manufacture between 60% Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and 40% Lockheed Martin, meant as a Japanese version of the American F-16. The Japanese wanted to build an aircraft from scratch to develop their engineer skills. The project was also promising and enthusiastic for them, especially after their experience in building Japan's first aircraft, the Mitsubishi F-1. On the other hand, America was not pleased with the situation and effectively said, buy the F-16 and let's be done with it. This American displeasure increased with the persistent and pressing demand of Japan, an ally, to transfer the manufacturing and operational technology of the F-16 systems to the Japanese fighter. Of course, this jest did not last long. The Japanese realized after years that they were reinventing the wheel and wasting their money to produce an aircraft that is a copy of the American F-16 but with a Japanese name, knowing that America would never give them the technological details they wanted. That's why they only built 98 Mitsubishi F-2s and production stopped in 2011. They then completely depended on American fighters to the extent that in 2020, they contracted to buy 147 F-35s for about $23 billion. But does that mean the Japanese have given up on the dream of owning a fighter jet they can share in manufacturing and have it marked as made in Japan? No, not yet, and by the way, this is the dream that the Saudi kingdom wants to share with them in any way possible. As for France, the situation is quite different from Japan. France has had an advanced aviation industry and global military manufacturing companies for more than 70 years, the most important of which are Dassault and Thales. But the aircraft we want to focus on is the Rafale, which we can consider the successor of the Dassault Mirage 2000. The French Navy adopted Rafale for the first time in 2004. And over time, it began to capture a large share of the fighter jet market. That's why Rafale purchase requests have been continuously rising since 2015, from the moment the Egyptian Air Force bought the first batch of the French fighter to be sold to a foreign country. In recent years, Dassault, the French company that manufactures Rafale, has surpassed all global companies in all tenders held by any country, except for Lockheed Martin, which manufactures the F-35 and plays in a league of its own. I want to tell you that Rafale orders by the end of last year 2022 reached 21 billion euros, which was the main reason for France capturing a share of 27 billion euros or 11% of global arms sales that year. France is also currently exploiting the reluctance of a significant number of countries to buy Russian aircraft. Why? Because of the American and European sanctions, of course, and because buying Russian weapons now means less security and military relations with Western countries and strained political relations. At the same time, there's a rising wave in the world right now among a number of countries that want to step out of the full dependence on American aircraft and weapons. Remember when I told you in the beginning that buying a fighter jet doesn't just mean buying an aircraft? Here's what's happening as a practical embodiment of that principle. France found it a great opportunity both to gain influence and to snatch a few billions. That's why Eric Trappier, the CEO of Dassault Aviation, part of the Dassault group that manufactures aircraft, said in June last year that there are countries that don't want to buy Russian or American aircraft, so we, as the French, could be the more neutral choice for them. And if we look, we find that his words are correct to some extent. For example, last month, India agreed to buy 26 Rafale jets for its navy in a deal that will reach about $10 billion along with other weapons, including submarines. Rafale here won the competition against the American Boeing Super Hornet, which most of us saw in the Top Gun movie. This isn't the first French Rafale deal with India. In 2016, the Indian Air Force bought 36 Rafale jets for $8.8 billion, and they have received all of them. The Indian customer, in particular, is currently a catch for France because it will encourage other customers or countries to buy Rafale along with complete relations with France. That's why a French official told the Financial Times last July that these two deals reinforce India's position as a key member of what can now be called the Rafale Countries Club. This club currently includes India, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Greece, Croatia, and Indonesia, countries that own Rafales or have already signed contracts to own them, like the UAE, which signed a contract to purchase 80 Rafales in 2021 for $19 billion, making it the largest Rafale operator in the world after France itself. The French are optimistic that Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Malaysia, and Colombia are on the way. This club, according to the French, is a very important political axis. They can work on strategic alliances with it on all levels. This means that manufacturing your fighter jet is not just about making an aircraft, but about building complete relations. But despite this French success, America still has its status and cannot be compared to any country. For example, the delivery and orders of Rafale worldwide from 2015 to today are about 500 aircraft, half the number of F-35s that America will have delivered by the end of this year, 2023. And it's also less than the sales of Boeing Super Hornet and the older F-16 by Lockheed Martin. The second thing is that marketing Rafale in Europe is very difficult. There's a deep and entrenched European culture established by the United States on the continent, which is that America is the first and most important guarantor of European security. This is the very solid European conviction. That's why, for example, last year 2022, Germany requested F-35 aircraft. This American loyalty drives the French, who have the conviction that Europe should be for the Europeans, crazy. Of course, this French conviction doesn't usually come out except when there's money and influence at stake. That's why Dassault, which manufactures Rafale, was at the height of its anger when they tried to convince Belgium to buy Rafale in 2018. Belgium told them, "This is very nice indeed, and your aircraft are really lovely." So did Belgium buy afterwards? Not at all. It went straight ahead and bought 34 F-35s from Lockheed Martin and will begin receiving them this year. This American dominance leads us to a very important question. How did America eat the global fighter jet market pie a long time ago? America, in the late 80s, made a very smart plan to produce multi-role jet fighters and sell them to everyone, meaning they deliver the aircraft to any country and customize it according to the national security and defense needs of that country. At the same time, America also can control the aircraft's capabilities depending on whether the buying country is close to American policies or not. That's why, during this period, the F-16 produced by Lockheed Martin, the world's largest defense manufacturer, dominated the global market and made huge profits for America compared to its lower manufacturing costs, especially since it was sold without a prior American commitment to bear the costs of its development and maintenance. To give you a clear example of America's dominance over the global fighter jet market and the dominance of the F-16 over other types, including American ones, and, by the way, a large number of countries still use them to this day, we find that between 1991 and 1995, Western countries collectively produced 1,767 fighter jets. 727 of these aircraft were F-16s, 597 were other American types, and the remaining 343 aircraft were produced by other countries than America. This means we have 1,324 American-made aircraft out of a total of 1,767 aircraft. America certainly didn't stop there. That's why it developed the Joint Strike Fighter program, which is considered the most expensive weapons manufacturing program in history for more than 20 years. This program produced the most technologically advanced fighter jet in the world, the F-35. What's the story of this amazing program? What happened was that in 2001, the Pentagon went to the folks at Lockheed Martin and told them, "We want to work on a huge project that will make you money like crazy." "What do you want?" they asked. "We want an aircraft with 3 variants that fits the 3 main branches of our military, the Air Force, the Navy, and the Marine Corps." And by 2015, the program produced the first variant of this killer aircraft, the F-35. Over these years, the program was spread across most American states, where we find local companies and service providers in every state participating in it. And later, 14 countries joined, totaling 1,500 companies around the world providing services. The cost of this program for the American military's needs alone over the fleet's expected 60-year lifespan will exceed $1.5 trillion, and some estimates even reach $1.7 trillion over the next 5 or 6 decades. Aside from the American military's huge needs, there are 18 countries from Norway in the northwest to South Korea in the Far East that have either already received the F-35 or are waiting in line for it. So, America has made billions of dollars in profits and dominated the fighter jet market for a long time. What's the next step? America is currently giving priority to developing specialized jet fighters instead of multi-role jets aimed at export, with its primary goal being to better equip its military to face the rise of new great powers, specifically its arch-enemy, China. However, Washington's defense policies seem to have a steep price and will likely backfire, simply leading to a decline in American dominance over the global jet fighter market because we are currently in the post-Cold War era. Yes, 2 posts, as you heard. This means that during the Cold War era, countries were satisfied with buying ready-made aircraft, wanting quick and advanced options, and wanting relations with one of the 2 global poles. But the situation is completely different now, and with new competitors entering the market for manufacturing and exporting fighter jets, we find that the F-35, despite its huge costs, is not enough to take the American fighter jet industry into the future or to retain its dominance for a longer period. Between 2035 and 2040, the global fighter market and the defense industry's market in general will have more players in favor of less American dominance, because countries will not rely on American fighter jets forever, as explained. And the truth is that this is a global trend revealed by the Russia-Ukraine war and the trade war between America and China. In both wars, America used part of its immense power and strength to hit Russia and the Chinese economy mercilessly. What happened made there be almost a single motto in the mind of every government in any country in the world: covered by America is naked. Remember Japan? Japan, as I told you, is one of the countries that did not give up on its dream of building its own fighter jet, despite its almost complete dependence on American fighters and technology. That's why we find that at the end of last year, the prime ministers of Japan, Britain, and Italy announced the new Global Combat Air Program, known as GCAP, the first ever military tripartite program for any of the countries involved, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is very interested in being a partner in it. So, what is this program? This program is a historic program to develop and manufacture a 6th-generation fighter jet ready by 2035, the result of merging the Japanese FCAS program and the British Tempest program to produce this future aircraft. The goal is that by 2040, London and Tokyo specifically will completely stop buying F-35s and Eurofighters. Their air forces will depend on this aircraft. The question here is, why did Japan take this hypothetical step and always close itself off? Why did it go to the British and Italians despite being America's biggest ally in Asia and one of its most important allies in the world? Japan tells you, we are buddies with the Americans and everything, but this full loyalty was in the past. In the military and security spaces now, you take this full loyalty and throw it behind your back. There are several respectable reasons why Japan stepped out of its closed room. First, unlike the usual American dealing, Britain offered Japan cooperation in joint research and the basic design of the aircraft engine and radar. These are two areas where Japan was very restricted during the development of its Mitsubishi F2. So the Japanese are optimistic that they will be an equal partner to Britain, unlike America, which tends to have complete dominance over its joint defense projects with any other country, even if it's an ally, to retain a permanent technological and military advantage. This can be seen in the American constant refusal to share the source code, a code impossible to modify any modern aircraft or develop it without. Secondly, the Japanese have the ambition to build a fighter jet more powerful and advanced than the American F-35 and the European Eurofighter. As maritime countries, Japan and Britain in particular want a stealth fighter capable of carrying out various missions with a slightly longer cruising range, with dual engines and capable of carrying a large number of different missiles. But they want all this at lower costs than the astronomical costs of the F-35. Especially since the cost of developing new fighter jets is very difficult and expensive. Difficult for a single country to cover the required money, except in rare exceptional cases. Thirdly, Japan, Britain, and Italy believe that through joint development and reducing the massive production costs, they can increase the number of aircraft produced, which will enable them to sell these 6th-generation jets to other countries as America does. The plan is for Britain and Italy to sell to European markets, and Japan to sell to Asian markets, especially Southeast Asian countries. These are Japan's reasons. What about Britain, which is undoubtedly America's most important ally in the world without dispute? The British Defense Doctrine, known as the Integrated Review published in 2021, shows the English tendency to form alliances and establish partnerships with Pacific Rim countries, including the United States, Australia, and Canada. This is a long-standing British national direction, more obvious after their exit from the European Union. However, this doctrine is currently being rewritten due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which will likely partially return Britain to the European fold. That's why we find that London had allocated £2 billion sterling to the Tempest program, an essential and necessary amount to retain the British technical skills and sovereign aerial combat job holders. Skills that could have been lost and evaporated after the Eurofighter Typhoon leaves service, especially since there was no budget or comprehensive project to employ them. The second thing is that this program will be beneficial to the British economy. In 2021, PricewaterhouseCoopers estimated that the GCAP program would provide about 21,000 jobs annually by 2050 and would contribute more than £26 billion to the economy. For all these reasons and more, Saudi Arabia is very interested in entering this project, as a financing partner at least. Saudi Arabia has been pressuring the three countries since last January. Britain and Italy have already agreed in principle to Saudi Arabia's membership and see that Saudi participation in financing will push the project forward. In return, Japan is still opposed and wants the project in its current framework, but the direct request for joining the project submitted by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida last month when they met in Jeddah might expedite the Japanese approval. But this is not the only project in Europe. There is another project France itself is a part of, and it is currently the largest arms manufacturing program in Europe, called the Future Combat Air System, known as FCAS. This is a project between Germany, France, and Spain to produce a new 6th-generation fighter jet launched by Berlin and Paris in 2017 and joined by Spain in 2019. This project's initial cost is 3.8 billion euros and will be under full French supervision after resolving the disputes that had been stalling it by the end of last year, 2022. It includes the production and development of manned aircraft and drones, the development of a space communications network, and new stealth technologies. But, of course, the most anticipated part is the awaited fighter jet. These two projects, whether GCAP or FCAS, reflect almost everyone's anger at the strict American export controls on military technology, which often make owners and operators of American aircraft, such as the F-35, unable to adapt them to their security and military needs. Of course, America, as usual, isn't silent before everyone, and since 2014, it has been working on a program to produce manned and unmanned 6th-generation fighters. The program is called the Next Generation Air Dominance, or NGAD, and indeed, the United States has built the first aircraft in this program and tested it in real flight in 2020. This aircraft is supposed to replace the F-22, the most powerful fighter jet in the world. The new American 6th-generation fighter jet is expected to cost between $200 and $300 million per aircraft, twice as expensive as the most expensive current fighter jet. But it's also expected that, like the F-22, this aircraft will not be available for export, making the countries above speed up their own programs and projects. On the other side, China and Russia are currently flying 5th-generation fighters, the Chinese J-20 and J-31, and the Russian Su-57. China has also revealed a model for 6th-generation fighters it is currently developing. Although there's almost a consensus that American aircraft are stages ahead of them, China is making considerable strides in this area, unlike Russia, which is hampered by economic difficulties and lacks financial capacity, and is preoccupied with the Ukraine war. Of course, as I said at the very beginning, there are attempts on small scales in Turkey, South Korea, and even Taiwan to produce a domestic fighter jet, and if we look at Europe, we find that Sweden already has its grip in fighters, and although America is gradually losing its dominance over this market as we explained, this dominance will remain for the coming decades, but in different areas, such as the difference in the power and advancement of aircraft, and that its major companies, led by Boeing and Lockheed Martin, will still have the lion's share of the engine market and some of the most important electronic parts. This leads us to the last question in today's episode. Elon Musk was in a symposium in the heart of the Air Force talking in front of American pilots, and he told them he expects the era of manned fighter jets to end in favor of drones or unmanned aircraft. Is his prediction correct? The truth is, yes and no. Musk is right in that drones, specifically with various capabilities, will take up more space, but the role of manned fighter aircraft will remain very fundamental for a long period. That's why the American military-industrial complex and those interested in the spread of drones see a new path that no army in the world has tested before, which is the integration of human experience with machines. This will create a different space where no army in the world has tested before, and this is not my words, but those of Steve Fendley, president of the Automated Systems Department at Kratos, an American company for security and defense solutions. That's why I adopt the viewpoint that says the future is in the integration of machine and human, at least in the near future, to have a combat team of manned fighter aircraft accompanied by a team of unmanned aircraft. This gives you a complete operational team with the least human casualties, but without excluding the direct human interaction element, which still retains its complete superiority in direct mechanical interaction with data collection and analysis from the battlefield and making more encompassing decisions than drones, which are subject to remote human control with a wider margin of error. Overall, America's loss of space to be the first supplier of combat aircraft in the world, and by a wide margin, means directly and indirectly the loss of part of its political and security influence globally. That's all I have to say. I've taken a lot of your time, but today's topic was very important and needed to be explained in detail. And as usual, at the end, I have a question for you. Do you think we might find other countries soon manufacturing their fighter jets and weapons completely? Or is that difficult? And which country would that be?